Hi friend, welcome to the Dream Brave podcast. I'm Wai Jia. No matter where you're at, God cares about the little and big dreams He's placed in your heart. But how can we pursue our dreams at a sustainable pace? How do we avoid burnout? What does it mean to dream brave from a posture of rest? I'd love to invite you on a journey with me where I challenge you to dive into scripture, call into remembrance what God has done in your life, to put our faith in a God who's greater than we ever dared imagine. I'll be sharing parts of my journey and interviewing ordinary Christians like you and me with extraordinary faith, which I hope will inspire you to dream brave even when you feel too small. Have you ever felt worn out or breathless in trying to pursue your goals? Have you ever wished you could just go away with Jesus and find rest for your soul? Does Sabbath seem like an impossibility? If those are the questions you've asked, this is the right space for you. Today, I'm excited to have a great friend, Hern Shung, with me. Hern Shung has been serving as a pastoral overseer at Trinity Methodist Church in Singapore. He has a huge portfolio in overseeing youth, family life, and discipleship ministries, and he's especially passionate about building a future-ready church for the generations ahead. I got to know Hern Shung actually because one day I wanted to learn how to use the Logos Bible study tool, and I just did a random shout out on Instagram. And this stranger was actually willing to give up his afternoon of his time to help a complete stranger like me. So since then, I've really deepened my growth in the study of the Word, in writing Dream Brave, in my sermon preparation. So friends, Hern Shung has got a big part to play in my theological journey. So since then, he's become such a dear friend to both Cliff and myself. He has the most generous heart I know, but also he works very hard. Over the past year that I've known him, he's always been traveling, preaching, organizing conferences. So in Hern Shung, when you told us that you were going to take a couple of months to a year off for a sabbatical, it really came as a big surprise. But also, I think Cliff and I admired it so much because I know it did not come easy. So Hern Shung, welcome to the Dream Brave podcast. It's so good to have you with us.
And thanks for having me, Wai Jia. Thank you for that.
Could you share with us, Hern Shung, a little bit with our listeners about your background, like, where you grew up, a little bit about how you came to this season that you're in right now? Because it's such a unique one, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'm from in Singapore, but if
Mm-hmm.
you notice a little bit of a tinge of accent in there, is I also spent a bit of time overseas in Perth, doing my high
Right.
school and then also doing university there. So I grew up in Singapore and Perth. At some stage, I felt the call of God. In a very short summary, felt the call of God, entered into ministry. And this year
Mm-hmm.
is my 11th year in ministry. So I did 3 years in Bible school, did my Masters of Divinity, came out to work, and
Mm-hmm.
this is my 11th year. And currently, as you shared, I'm 4 months into my sabbatical, and I got about 2 more
Wow.
months to go, which ends in July as well. So that's the current season I'm in. Yeah.
Wow. So after 11 years of hard work, you decided to take a 6-month sabbatical journey.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I'm interested to know, I always think that full-time ministers or pastors have a very hard time taking sabbatical because the weekends, which is everybody's rest time, are actually your busiest periods. So I'm actually curious to
Yeah.
know, like on a day-to-day basis, how do you practice Sabbath?
Uh, I'm probably the worst person to ask, and that's the reason why I'm on a sabbatical. But it's really true because I mean, just to put into a bit of context to give you an idea into our life a little bit, uh, where most people take a weekend to kind of rest, relax, spend with family. For us, the peak of our week happens on the weekends. So starting
Ah,
from Friday, we're already in our mind, we're gearing up for the weekend. For us, in our church, we do usually Friday nights, especially when I was handling youth, we will have youth activities, we have rehearsals and everything like that.
right.
Come Saturday mornings, that's where the life of the church begins, where we'll have courses, we
Mm,
run baptism membership courses and all these different things that we're
right.
teaching at. Saturdays, afternoons, we're doing services. Sundays, we're doing services. Even after service ends, a lot of times we stay on to do meetings. We have board
Yeah.
meetings, we have leaders meetings, we have other things to be at, And
Wow.
so usually the only time for us to really end is maybe Sunday evening. But
Wow.
it's for my family. They know that the moment I come back on Sunday evening, I'm crashed out in my bed and taking a nap because I'm just so exhausted from the weekend as well.
Wow.
So usually that's for us. that's where it ramps up for the weekend. And then we are
Mhm.
able to maybe take a day off during the week. But even during the week, the day off as well, sometimes, it's hard. We always say that ministry never goes on pause because something happens. We've got to do a
Yeah.
wake, a funeral, or someone
Yeah.
calls us with an emergency and our phones
Yeah.
are by our side. We have to answer it as well. So sometimes it's
Yeah.
really hard for us to
Wow.
set aside time for a sabbatical as well.
Yeah.
In my attempt to, sorry,
Mhm.
you're
No,
about to
I'm
say?
gonna interrupt you right there, Hern Shung, because I think that a lot of listeners, they might not be pastors, they might not be full-time ministers,
Yeah.
but I think even then they can relate to what you are sharing, because even though many of us might have, like, like a Monday to
Mm,
Friday or Monday to Saturday kind of job, but whether we're in Singapore or whatever part of the world that we are in, we go into this ministry mode as well. And
yes.
so, even though they might not be ministers, I believe a lot of listeners who are listening in, they are people who love Jesus. And
Mm,
so they
mm,
throw themselves full on into all these ministerial activities on the weekends. So,
yep.
even as you're sharing, I believe a lot of people are connecting the dots and feeling that fatigue and burnout that you so share.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And carry on, you were about to say.
I think you know me. If I look at my past 10 years, I'm not the best person to talk about sabbaticals because that's the reason why
Mm,
I'm on sabbatical here is for me
right.
to kind of reset my rhythms as well. I think
Mm,
initially when I began, I started with a good rhythm of life. So,
right.
I cultivated a good rhythm of life, but along the way, when everything starts catching up, that's where the
Mm,
rhythm kind of goes off beat and everything. And you end up, giving away something. So what you used to create a day off and you carve a day off, you start to like kind of compromise on it, you let go. And I'm sure it actually applies to most of our listeners out there
yeah,
because, especially those with families, with kids, it's hard to
for
actually take a day
sure.
off, right? I mean, you would know as well with two young kids as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think along the way, how I used to do it was I used to carve a day out and I realized that's really hard. One of the
Mm,
things that halfway through the 10 years of ministry, someone taught me was to just slowly create moments in the day where you can take a Sabbath in a way. So catch your breath and kind of
wow.
do that. So that's been a practice I've been
Mm,
trying to do in ministry. I start the day a little
mm.
early. I go to the gym. The gym has been my Sabbath because I put my phone away, for an hour and a half. I'm there. My mind is off work because my mind is just telling my body to survive the workouts and everything. So
That's
I
great.
think
You're
that's
not
been
answering
the,
texts.
yeah,
You're not
not
answering
answering
texts in between
texts.
sets.
Exactly, not answering texts in between sets. And your mind is just focused on, like, not telling your body not to give up as well. So that's actually been a little Sabbath time that I've done. During the COVID season as well, when we were in lockdown, I think some of the Sabbaths that I did was I learned to take a long walk. And I think there is this common thread
Mm,
that for me, my Sabbath involves actually putting my phone away because I think my phone for me was the
wow.
biggest distraction for me where everything was coming
Yeah.
in through there. So that's how I kind of
Wow.
realized that one of the things that how I practiced Sabbath was learning to remove some distractions that was maybe disturbing my restfulness. Yeah.
Wow, I love that. So one of the things I think that you've pointed out, which is so precious, is to practice Sabbath as not just a weekly rhythm, but what you're saying is to create pockets of rest throughout the day as a daily practice, almost, so to speak.
Yeah, so I think that's 100% what maybe Sabbath would look like for some of us who are not able to do that as well.
Right.
I think sometimes the church, sometimes maybe we paint Sabbath as a day off, but
Yeah.
some of us with, like I said, with families, we think that's more for the privilege, right? For a well-being
Mm,
package for the privilege who are able to do so. But I think
right.
when Jesus did talk about the Sabbath, he meant it for every
Yeah.
single person, regardless of stage of
Yeah.
life, circumstances as well. But maybe it's just
Yeah.
learning to break away from the usual concept of what a Sabbath looks like. If you can take a
Right.
whole day off for a week, that's great. But if you can't and circumstances doesn't allow you to, I do think it's still possible to practice the Sabbath as well on a
Wow.
daily basis.
That is so great and reassuring to hear, especially for people who, for example, even work in jobs like healthcare,
Yeah.
where it could be on shifts and on call, and your entire rhythm is just kind of messed up. You really need to know that instead of carrying that guilt and condemnation, that God actually wants us to work from a posture of rest, and that's something we can practice every day.
Yes, yes, 100%. There's this guy called Pete Scazzaro. He wrote this book
Yeah,
called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, Leadership,
I
the whole
love that guy.
emotionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Pete Scazzaro says this, and I thought it was really good. It's on I saved it on my Instagram, but he says that most of the time we are living at 100% capacity that
Mm-hmm.
we leave no margin for distractions, for
Yeah.
surprises, for
Yeah.
self-care, and for rest, right? So
Wow.
I love that word margin, because I think
Yes.
that's really what maybe a lot of us are doing. We're living at 100% most of the time. And Pete
Mm-hmm.
Scazzero gives us this thought: imagine if we learn to live at 80% capacity with a 20% margin that allows us to
Wow.
be interrupted, to be surprised, to delight, and to take care of ourselves and to rest as well. I thought that's a brilliant thought. Like, what if we can learn to create margin in our lives? And that's something that even in amidst ministry, when I saw that, I thought, hey, that's something I want to do, practice. So,
Right.
I used to line up meetings back to back, right? So,
Right.
I would see, okay, I got this meeting. I think it's going to take 2 hours. Okay, then so if the meeting is at 2 o'clock, I'm going to put my next meeting at 4 o'clock. I'll do something.
Right.
But then
Get
one
it.
of the things I learned was maybe I need to create a bit of margin, create a half an
Yes.
hour to take a break, catch my breath, maybe even to like process, debrief what the previous meeting was and prepare myself for the next meeting as well. So that's some of the little
Wow.
things I began to pick up along the way in ministry, that what I can begin to practice in between. One of the margins
Wow.
was that I would get up maybe a little bit earlier just to
Hmm.
get ready for the day, by doing a bit
Right.
of quiet time, reading a book, or listening to music, listening
Yeah.
to worship, and just getting ready for the day. And that's the little margin that I
Mm.
create as well. And just
Wow.
one more. One of the margin was that because I drive, right? One of the
Yeah.
margins that I learned to create was just to sit in my car before meeting someone and just sit there for a while, just to, like,
Mm.
okay, get myself ready, catch my breath, and then get ready for the next thing as well. So that's actually something that I
Wow.
began to learn along the way in ministry, about how do I learn to create margin in my life and intentionally put it into
Wow.
schedule and calendars as well.
That is so good, Han Sheng. When you talk about margin, I noticed that there is a common thread in your times of making space for God, and that is almost like a time of solitude. It's like
Yes.
you're intentionally creating this space and you're not afraid of not being busy. It's almost like you're saying, I'm pushing back to create this space so that I can be with God before my next thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that is so
So
good.
so
Mm.
that's pretty much it. I think,
Yeah.
and I have to say that I'm not the best at it. So I have to keep giving a
Hmm.
caveat to say that, I'm not like
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not like Brother Lawrence, or any of those guys that you read. I'm the guy that struggles with taking a Sabbath. I'm the guy that my friends, when they ask me, like, people ask me, Hern Shung, how do you not burn out? I like to joke, but I don't have time to get burnt out, and so that's me. So that's a caveat I have to keep giving. But along the way, it's what I'm learning to slowly do,
Right.
is to do that, and to learn to create margin wherever I can.
Thank you. Thank you. Since we're talking about burnout,
Mm,
one of the questions I'm really curious to know is how did burnout happen for you? And what was your turning point? Because even in my own journey, I had a turning point, like a critical period where I had repeated kind of cycles of burnout when I was like a frontline worker in COVID. And then that kind of like pulled me back to realize that, wow, this really isn't going to work out in the long run, no matter how much
mm.
the world demands of me. So when was that turning point for you? What was the breakthrough that you had to come out of that cycle? Because sometimes when we're in that vicious kind of mode, it's so hard just to like stop that and get out of the rat race
Yeah.
or the rhythm, so to speak.
I don't think there was a singular pivotal turning point. I
Mm,
think for me, it was a growing realization of, it was like almost going down this slippery slope, where at some point or stage in life and in ministry, I did come to a realization that I wasn't in a healthy place. So it wasn't just wake up one
wow.
morning and just went, okay, I'm burnt out kind of thing. But it was really at a point where I began to notice signs within
Mm,
myself that I did not quite like about myself as well, or I did not quite.
mm,
It didn't sit well with me. I mean, let me be really honest. Like, it came to a point where I wasn't really enjoying what I was doing.
wow.
I stepped into ministry. I loved my work, and I came in
Yeah.
very excited, ready to go and everything. But I think it came to a point where
Mm,
getting up in the morning, the drive was slowly going. I wasn't enjoying what I was doing. I also find myself growing more cynical, right? So, when you start
mm.
in something, you're faith filled, you're ready to go. You're like, okay, dream brave and dream big. Mind the pun there, but along the way as well, it's you don't have the time. I found that I wasn't dreaming anymore. It was simply
Wow.
trying to survive and exist, getting up, going through the day, getting from one thing to the next thing. Every weekend is just like, oh my gosh, okay, that's one weekend down,
Yeah.
here's to the next weekend, and just going at it as well. The cynicism looked as if like when something came up, when I knew that when I was younger, when an issue came up, I'll be like, no, we can tackle this, we can go with this. But then my mindset began to change where, it's just the way it is. We're just stuck here where we are. And so, I mean,
Understand.
yeah, these little signs that began to pop up in my life that I
Yeah.
began to see,
Yeah.
I began
Yeah.
to see myself also straying a little bit from what I'm doing now, or straying a little bit from what I actually came to ministry for. I really loved
Understand.
journeying with people. I loved really life on life interaction, but I found myself doing a
Yeah.
lot more administrative work, being put to
Right.
organize stuff, conferences. And I think it was just a time for me to really, I felt like I needed to step back a little bit, that I didn't have the
Right.
bandwidth, the space to step back. And I think that's where I
Mm-hmm.
knew that maybe it's time for me to kind of, it was burnout, but also time for me to kind
Yeah.
of step away, get some space. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing all those things, Han Sheng, because I think a lot of people think burnout always has to look one way,
Mm,
that it must look like fatigue or like, having depression or lying on a bed. And until you reach that point, you think to yourself, I'm not really burnt out. I can keep going on. But what you're saying is that, delight is actually, this is my personal
mm,
discovery also,
mm.
delight is such a big marker of where we are at emotionally, mentally, psychologically. And what you are saying is this slow drain of delight can actually be such a good signpost as to where we are in terms of our well-being and in terms of where we are with rest and working from that posture of rest.
Yeah, and we had this conversation a while back when I was over with you and
Yeah.
Cliff, right? But delight was actually a very important word for me, because
Mm-hmm.
one of the big realization I actually when I started my sabbatical, I had a conversation with a friend about it, a dear friend, and
Mm.
basically the friend was someone that I allowed to speak into my life, and the person said, hey, maybe for as you go into this sabbatical, maybe the one
Mm.
question is, what gives you joy? And when he
Wow.
asked me that question, I was just like, oh, actually, I didn't know what gives me joy, because not to sound like super heroic or anything, but a big part of my ministry growing up, especially in youth ministry, was I did things that the young people like to do, right? So
Yeah.
they would go to like, trampoline parks. Okay, I'll go it. I don't like trampoline parks, but I would go to where they would like to
Mm.
do to go to. I would do what they would like to do. A lot of times, a lot of things that I began doing was actually learning to put them first, do things that they want to do first. That I realized that
Mm.
if you ask me maybe in January and the question was asked to me, what gives me joy? I kind of didn't know like what was my joy factor that gives me delight that I could really enjoy as well. Yeah, so I think
Wow.
that was really something when I went into the sabbatical, and I started my, I went overseas and everything. That was something I also want to discover.
Yeah.
Like, what do I actually like to do? What gives me joy in life
Wow.
as well? And so I think delight was a very important word for the sabbatical.
Yeah, I love that because I think a lot of people, whether you're in a helping profession or even
Mm,
just parents, like we're always giving out to people.
yeah.
And what you are actually telling all of us to do is to be aware of what causes that wellspring of joy to bubble up inside of us, which sometimes we might just be no longer in tune with because we're always being in tune to other people's
Yeah.
needs,
And another word for
right?
delight is, I mean, the buzzword
Yeah.
currently in society is the word self
Mhm.
care. That's essentially delight, right? I mean, it is. It is. For some people, their self care looks like going for Pilates, and that's good on them.
Yeah.
That's their self care. For others,
Mhm.
self care is taking a break or sitting in a cafe. And I think it looks like very differently for people, but that's also little pockets of Sabbath that you can take to bring you joy again
Right,
as
right.
well.
Wow. Now, Hansheng, I think not many people would have maybe the time or the ability or maybe even the courage to take like a long
Mm,
Sabbath. So what was it that made you decide that, you know what, I'm not just going to take a week off or like a weekend off. I actually want to take this big leap
mm.
and I want to move into something a little bit more audacious and drastic. Because I really want to go into what were some of the mind-blowing things that you learned about Sabbath through this sabbatical break of yours. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I don't see it as courageous. For me, it was necessary. Yeah. So for me, it wasn't a
Okay.
courageous thing, but I think for me, it was more so it was a necessary thing for me to take. Like like I said, I came to a realization I wasn't in a healthy place. I couldn't keep going on what I was doing and keep going on there as well. I knew that, I needed space, I needed bandwidth, I needed to slow down and to catch up with myself as well. My head was always living in a 2-3 weeks down the road, months down the road, thinking about the next thing that I had to go through. And I just needed a time
Yeah.
not to do that, and to just simply be present and to like start listening to my body, my mind, my soul. And so for me, that
Right.
was the necessary thing for me to do, not just courageous.
Mm.
But so, and the beauty
Right.
of it is, I have to be really honest. I think I was very privileged that in my contract in the church that I was working in, that I am working it, not was, I am working it, is that there was a clause that allowed me to take a sabbatical after 10 years of work. And so for me, it was just that I chose to exercise it. I thought it was a good time for me to do it. And I mean,
Mm.
so that's why I began to take this 6 month sabbatical.
The reason why I say that it was courageous is
Mm,
because I think so many of us, even though we might feel it's necessary, we know we need it internally, but externally, there are just so many forces and messages telling us that we are indispensable. And I share this from a place of,
mm,
having had to go for spine surgery
yep,
suddenly, like last year, and realizing that, you know what, I am off the pulpit for 4 months. I'm not at work, and the world is just spinning without me, and it's okay. That was like my greatest realization
yeah.
that it's okay. But for you, how was it? Or what was that realization to know that it's okay? Because I know sometimes it might be easier to take time off work, but when your work is so intricately tied to people and things that you genuinely care about and are passionate about, then how do you
Mm.
pull away, so to speak?
So, okay, so I haven't really told people this as well, because I don't want to come across as, I mean, I didn't want this to come across
Yeah.
wrongly as well, but really, it was quite an intentional
Mm-hmm.
decision as well, beyond me being
Mm-hmm.
tired. A bit of backstory was actually last year, even beyond to the sabbatical, I think it was almost in a way that my ministry in life was really running at
Yeah.
full speed. So even the month before the sabbatical, I was speaking at 4 or 5 different camps and conferences
I
in
remember
December
that.
itself, right? Doing all that stuff as well. Yeah, so I was doing all that, even to, I don't know if I remember this, but even to the day before 31st December, my sabbatical started on 1st January. Even at 10 p.m., I was flying back from a different country after speaking at
I
a
remember
camp
that.
there. I was working to the very, very last day of my
Yes.
sabbatical. And so for me, it was, I was also in a realization that, in my mind, I thought, hey, wait a minute, I'm having good momentum in ministry. I'm getting invites, I'm getting things to go. And the sabbatical also was exactly what you said. It didn't kind of make sense. I mean, I was tired. I was, shared not in a healthy place, but at the same time, I could have just functionally kept going
Mm.
on and doing
Mm.
ministry as well. But I think also it's one of the things that I began to feel was that I needed to tell myself that my identity in my life wasn't tied down to my ministry as well. And that was very important for me to go, like, right at this peak of whatever I was doing and really enjoying. And I mean, the momentum that I was
Wow.
getting, I needed to also learn to step away from my own pride and from my own humility as well. Yeah. So I think that was why I kind of,
Han Shung, we got to stop right there for a little while because you just said something
okay.
really profound, and that is you made the realization that your identity is not tied to your work anymore. And I just want us just to pause and embrace that for a little bit
Mm,
because I think that is one of the hardest things to accept. And that's why so many of us cannot stop. It's because our identities are tied down to our work. We know that it's bad. We know that we're going to a place that it's unhealthy. And yet we are so tied into it because perhaps some of us have made it into almost like a mini idol or like a thing that we need in our lives. And what you're saying is so deep
mm,
because you were able to recognize that, take a step back and say, I don't want my identity to be tied to this anymore. I want it to be tied to God. That for me is huge. Wow. Yeah. What were
mm,
some of the other breakthroughs that you had? You think that
mm.
you went through the Sabbath? Because I'm thinking to myself, wow, like with you going to the Sabbath, were there things about rest itself that kind of surprised you? That made you go, wow, I didn't know Sabbath would be like this, or I didn't know God was like this.
Yeah, so growing up in the church, that the whole
Yeah.
idea of Sabbath sometimes can be a very holy thing
Yeah.
as well. Like, you gotta go away into a mountain, take a retreat, take a silent retreat, book yourself into something. And I think all those is great as well. But one of the things that I really, one of the
Mm.
things that blew my mind about Sabbath was actually this conversation on delight, right? Was that sometimes we have to resist the urge to
Yeah.
make the Sabbath so spiritual and so holy that
Yes.
we don't learn to sprinkle some delight into it, right? And learning to really
Yeah.
enjoy it. But I'm not just saying just do whatever, but
Yes.
only enjoy the life that
Mm.
God has given you. Enjoy the things around you. Enjoy the
Wow.
gift of the Sabbath is a gift itself to you as well. So have it as, have portions of it where you're abiding in Christ, but have portions of it where you're abiding in Christ, but also enjoying what Christ has given you, the
Wow.
space, the community, the friendships,
Wow.
the gift of even being able to take a break from work, and really just learn to do that as well. So I think that was delight
Yeah.
for me. That was something that really struck me as well, because I think this
Yeah.
was a new narrative that I learned to
Yeah.
grasp as well. That learning to really find joy, and learning to find joy, and realizing that actually it
Yeah.
is a gift from God. This whole thing to be able to move away is a gift.
That's
Yeah,
actually so liberating because I think so many of us think that, even for me, the way I used to practice Sabbath was like, I'm going to take an hour off and like just pray and read the Bible, just especially on Sundays only. And I mean, it was great. There's nothing bad with that. But then now, as I have kids and all that, I also realized that, wow, I want them to see Sabbath as a day where they can enjoy like creation that God has made. So we always make sure that on Sundays we go
yeah,
out, like outside of the house. We make sure that we're in like nature, like just enjoying God's creation because our family just loves, being in wildlife and in nature. And that's exactly what you shared. Like it's not necessarily such a like a holy spiritual thing. You gotta be at church all day
mm,
and have the Bible at your at your desk.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
No, but please don't misunderstand me. That's important.
Of course.
I think there is a spiritual aspect of Sabbath that is really important. It's
Yeah.
learning
Yeah.
to go into the Word, finding delight in that as well. But I
Yes.
also think that that's not all that there is. There is also an element of
Yeah.
delighting and learning to abide in God in other ways, and also being present to the life that He has given you. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we're talking about this, Hern Shung, is there like a right way to Sabbath? What are some of the principles that you would share about how to Sabbath correctly, so to speak? Because before I had read books about Sabbath, I always thought exactly like it's this spiritual practice that we have to have. But only recently, I've just had my idea of Sabbath just turned on its head when I realized that wow, it's about delight, it's about being liberated. It's also for me, it's about
Mm,
allowing it to be individualized because for some of us meeting people, it could be very draining, for example. So actually on my
mm,
personal Sabbath, I actually don't meet people. Whereas for someone else, where meeting people is very rejuvenating, that's actually
yep.
probably a huge thing to do, like community going out for meals and all that. So I think Sabbath looks different for everyone. So could you share with us some principles about how it could look different and yet we can
Yeah.
uphold the same values, so to speak?
So this is not an original thought. I was in my sabbatical. I've been listening to sermons on Sabbath, reading books on Sabbath as well, right? So this is something I picked up from a guy called
Mm,
John Mark Comer, who wrote a book called Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and also from another
mm,
guy called Tyler Staton, who is as a pastor at Bridgetown Church as well. If we go back to the root word of Sabbath, Shabbat in the Hebrew word, there's dual meanings to it. The first word Shabbat is to stop, right? And that's the Sabbath that we usually know what it means, to stop what we're doing, to pause and to drop everything and to rest. That's one of the meanings of Sabbath as well.
wow.
But the word Sabbath, like what we've talked about, is also Shabbat, also can be translated to delight. And that's actually what we've been talking about. It has this dual idea of learning to stop from what we're doing, stopping from work, but also learning to delight in God and
Mm,
also delight in our lives that we've been given in this world as well. And I love that thought that Tyler Staton he gave in his sermon was that what can we do and stop what can we do in terms of stopping from our work and doing for 24 hours or for whatever time that Sabbath you have that
oh,
would learn to fill your heart with this throbbing joy within you. And I think that's something that I really took away, just went, wow, okay, that's a principle of Sabbath is learning to stop first from work, learning that we are not our work. We don't stop from work because the work has finished, but we stop even though
wow.
the work has not finished, because it's a way of our
Wow.
worship to God. It's a way that God has gifted us the opportunity to stop from that as well. But more than that, is also an invitation then to also take some time to delight in God, into the lives that we've been given. And the Sabbath, I like what Tyler Staton says, right? That the Sabbath, when experienced as God intended,
Wow.
is and should be the best day of our week,
Mm.
right? And that's really what he talks about in terms of Sabbath. So using that
Mm.
principle, I think the Sabbath is really, if I can borrow again
Mm.
from him, which I love the 4 things he said about how we can
Mm.
learn to practice the Sabbath. It's these 4 words: to stop, to rest, to delight, and to contemplate, right? We must learn to stop. We stop our work, not because the work is finished,
Wow.
but because it is time for us to stop and to
Wow.
worship God. And that's the first stop about stopping as well. We learn to rest. We learn to do activities that gives us
Mm.
rest, that helps to rejuvenate our soul. Resting is not just simply, resting the body is important as well, like learning to
Mm.
sleep.
Mm.
Sleep sometimes can be the most spiritual activity, right, that you can do in life. But resting also
Right.
needs to do a little bit of soul rest as well. You know what I mean? It's like you can. I always give. I have this example, like you can sit in a plane and be resting and sitting in a
Mm.
seat for 7 hours, but you can walk away feeling very
Wow.
restless, right? Because you feel tired after a long airplane ride. And so rest isn't just
Right.
simply stopping, but it's learning to do something that fills your soul.
Mm.
Then the third one is delight,
Right.
is doing something that gives you joy, that fills your soul with throbbing joy. If I can quote Tyler Staton well, that fills your soul with throbbing joy, to do something that maybe really brings on gratefulness into your life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? It could be community for those of us who are extroverted. It could be community, and I talk about community
That's
is
an
is
important thing to
community with
say.
people that actually replenishes your energy. That you actually enjoy with. That's an important one to say. Just to tap on what you said earlier.
Yeah, that's
For
right.
some of us, it could look like isolation because the entire week we're spending time with people, right? Some of us may
Mm.
be
So
in
true.
the front lines of customer service
Yeah.
and healthcare,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
delight might just be isolation and solitude, and that could be it as well. So delight, and then the last one is to contemplate, where that's the important thing that we are also called to do, that makes it
Mm-hmm. I
different
understand.
from secular rest, if I can use the
Wow.
word secular rest. But
Mm.
contemplation is learning to think about God, think about gratefulness, think about how um,
Mm.
to what God has done, to be grateful for everything that He has
Wow.
given you, to be so grateful for just being
Wow.
present to Him. And I think that's the abiding that we're called to do as well. I love what Tyler says. For 6 days of the week, right? We are contending for God to do something in life. We pray prayers to say, God, can you do something? Can you, solve this issue? Can you help me through this? But maybe for that one day of the week, just be thankful, be grateful. Don't ask for things, just receive. And it's something that he said, like, Sabbath rest cannot be grabbed, it can only be
Oh, I
received.
love
And I
that.
think contemplation is one of the ways
Wow,
that we
Han
can
Shung.
receive that Sabbath rest, is just learning to be grateful for it as well.
What a
Yeah.
wonderful way to kind of bring this to a landing, because as we go through the week hustling and grasping and chasing after our dreams and our goals, what I really, really love about what you're saying
Mm.
is to make sure that we come to a posture of humility and realize that God actually wants to gift us the Sabbath so that we can learn to receive, learn to stop, to delight, to rest, and then to contemplate His
100%.
goodness in our lives. And how amazing it is to just think about this idea that
Mm.
when we stop to do everything just to be with Him, we are actually making a loud clarion call to the world to say that I trust in my God. I trust that when I stop, He will provide. I trust that when I stop, the
Yeah.
world will still spin without me. So that's humility also. And it's also, I trust that when I stop, God, your goodness is
Mm.
still sufficient to rain down on me. Right? Wow, what a freeing space that is. Hansha,
Yeah.
as I bring this
100%.
to a close, I really just want to ask you some closing
Mm.
questions. Well, I kind of suspect I know the answer to this one, but what's a book title you would recommend our listeners to read?
In this current season, especially due to the topic of rest, I think The Ruthless Elimination
Wow.
of Hurry by John Mark Comer has been really instrumental for me. The whole idea actually comes from is based on Dallas Willard. I'm sure you've heard of him. Dallas Willard, he writes this quote that hurry is the greatest enemy of spiritual life. Hurry is the greatest enemy of our spiritual life, and that in order
Wow.
for us to grow, we must learn to eliminate hurry from our lives as well. So that's a ruthless elimination of hurry by John Mark Comer. I can give you a second book that
Wow.
he also wrote recently that just released called Practicing the Way that I'm currently reading, and that's just been similarly
Wow.
important and very instrumental in formation for me as well. So I think these are the two books currently.
Wow, what great reads. Mine is actually on the way. I ordered it the moment that you recommended it on your Instagram a couple of weeks ago. And what is one intentional practice that you do or that you would recommend to help our listeners keep their dreams on track or aligned with God's?
I think one of the things that I'm doing, and I want to learn to do even more when I return from my sabbatical, is to create margin in life and be very intentional to create margin in life.
Mm.
And part of the margin is also learning to be inspired. So the margin is not just, okay, catch a breath, but also creating space in my calendar to find myself to be inspired, to be refreshed, to be motivated as well. I think it's
Mm.
allowing the practice of calendaring is actually very important that I've learned as well. That, it's something that I think in order
Wow.
for us to practice the Sabbath must be intentionally practiced for us, right? Our life is a byproduct of our lifestyle, and it means we have to kind of fix our lifestyle so that the values that we value has to reflect what our life looks like as well. And so for me, the practice is allowing my life and the life that I want to lead and the values that I want to carry in my lifestyle to dictate my calendar and not the other way
Wow.
around, of allowing my calendar to dictate my life that I'm leading as well. So I think that's a practice I've started doing, and I'm gonna probably keep doing even more as I come back from sabbatical.
I love that. Just being so intentional with the Sabbath and using that to kind of like almost
Yeah.
plan or envision. Not necessarily to plan, but to just create that space with God.
Yeah, to create
Yeah.
margin with God, to allow interruptions, to allow delight.
The funny thing is, I actually find that, some of my best thoughts, some of the biggest, wildest dreams that have come to pass or that God has imprinted in my mind has actually come from doing Sabbath with him. Because for some reason, that margin and that space actually allows us to hear from him. So
Mm,
when I read Oswald Chamber, when he says prayer is the work, I never understood that until it actually happened for myself. Like I'm just, just there delighting,
mm.
receiving from God. And suddenly I'm like, bam, I'm like, oh my goodness, this thing is just gonna change like the next trajectory of my life.
Yeah, and exactly that. Like, I even to give this
Mhm.
idea that sometimes it's like, especially now I'm on a sabbatical, right? I don't think I've ever been this creative and fruitful ever for the past few years, because now there's space. My head actually has space for me to
Mm,
take a thought and allow that thought to progress into something. Whereas in the
mm,
past, because I'm so fixated on the next thing that happens, my mind is just thinking about, okay, I got this next meeting, I got this next project. And even
wow.
when a creative thought comes to
Yeah.
mind, I've got like no space for that. So it shelves somewhere else. But now when you create space and margin for it, you're able to
Yeah.
think more courageously. You're able to dream a little bit more,
Yes.
because you're allowing your mind a bit of space to wander a bit and to think down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think, when we live according to like God's DNA, like God's blueprint, like good things happen, right? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, we're just
Yeah.
people that forget, because I
Yes.
mean, Jesus keeps telling us that, right? Matthew
Yeah.
11:28, right? Come to me and I'll give you rest, right? Walk at my pace, right? Eugene Peterson says, right, walk with me, live with me, and come watch how I
Mm,
do it. And he gives us this idea that if we live at the pace of
mm.
Jesus, he gives us a way of living that is actually good for us, and
Wow.
men
That is so
it
good.
allows us to thrive as individuals and as Christians as well.
That is so good. And the last one is finish this line for me. Dream brave because.
Dream brave because we serve a God who dreams bravely over you. He says in Ephesians 3:20, for I am able to do abundantly more than you can ever ask or imagine according to his purposes.
Mm.
So I think a lot of time we dream brave is not because of our own strength, but because God himself has bigger dreams for you and is able to do that for us.
Wow, thank you so much for that. Father, we just thank you for this conversation on rest and of Sabbath. And we thank you that today we've learned so many gems, even as we've talked about learning to rest in you, about creating margin for you, about learning to stop from all that we are doing, to entrust our lives into your hand, knowing that by doing so, that Lord, ultimately, you are the God that we worship and serve, that will bring our lives to fruitfulness in ways that we will never be able to strive or earn our way into. So God, we just commit every listener, every person into your hands, that would you just do a transformative work in our hearts, that we might live out what Sabbath looks like on a moment to moment basis, such that we'll know that all of our lives are committed wholly to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, thank you so much, Hern Shung, for being on this podcast with us. We are so blessed today. It was awesome.
No, thank you for having me. I hope it was insightful and helpful.
Friend, I hope this conversation about rest and Sabbath with Hern Shung blessed you. If you know an ordinary Christian with an extraordinary faith whom you'd love to hear me interview, or if that person's you, please let me know. Just drop me a note at hello@kitedreams.org. Be blessed.